Okay, shall we get started then? Because we have got it's a fairly short session, which is part of the on purpose, and Kate will keep letting people in as we get going. So welcome everybody to cubesys's AVD discussion series, which is a 8-part series. We'll talk a little bit more about in a second, and that's been designed to hopefully get you guys talking and introduce the subject of AVD. So today you'll have myself, Paul Heaton. I'll do a bit of an introduction, but I'm going to hand over most of the work there to George. And George is one of the senior cloud consultants at cubesys and has been heavily involved in our 40+ AVD projects. So one of the lead engineers on a lot of that work. Lots and lots of experience around AVD, different scenarios, lots of different use cases that we've seen over things, and we'll talk about those as we go along. But during this thing, please ask us questions, right? So the format. We definitely want this to be a discussion format. We encourage questions. And that's because we late last year we did some webinars, and there were much more the traditional sort of presentation demo and then a few questions in chat. But the feedback we got from that was that can we have shorter ones? So that was a whole sort of half day. So can we have shorter sessions, and can we encourage some conversations so we can ask questions and get into things? So please do ask. We've got a plethora of experience in AVD, and I'd love to hear your questions, what you're doing with it, and even got a couple of our clients on there, so they might encourage them to join in and tell them some of our experiences, so they've already worked with us. Do know, of course, that this will be recorded, as Katie just mentioned, so we will record the session. We can send it out to you, and we'll send out a sort of pack afterwards, so you don't need to worry about remembering anything in particular. Before we get going any further and sort of introduce cubesys, I thought I'd remind you of the upcoming sessions, and we'll do this at the end of today as well. So we picked the subjects that you'll see on screen, and we picked an 8-part series. Please give us your feedback on any of those, or if you think something's missing that you particularly want to go in. But what we'll do during these sessions is go a bit deeper in it. So today's is really an introduction to AVD and the sort of overarching sort of technology. George will touch on all sorts of little demos and bits of introduction, but then we'll go deeper through the upcoming sessions, which are going to be run every 2 weeks. Aim is about a 45 minutes to an hour session, and encouraging you to ask questions again, right? So we'll go through some of the more detailed bits around FS logics and profiles and app attach, which is a really interesting technology, and our good friends at Nerdio. So we're big fans of Nerdio and what they bring to us, right? Here's a sort of selection of our customers. So cubesys, we're nearly 10 years old now, and been doing well, we started off with SCCM and end user compute area and moved into Azure. We've been doing that for a number of years now. And then 2 years ago, when AVD came along, we brought those two worlds together. So all that M365, Windows 10 SOEs and end user computing knowledge, alongside what we do around Azure platform adoption, the cloud adoption framework, right, and helping people understand and get the best out of it. And there's just a selection of some of the customers we work with, and they do vary quite a lot, right? So we work with large government agencies. So we've got like at the moment I'm in South Australia, and we work with about 10 different entities down here in SA. But we also do large education institutions like Queensland Uni. We're helping them move to adopt AVD from their current solution, and that'll be quite a large number of students and staff using that. Healthcare, all sorts of different areas, and also some smaller areas in the not-for-profit realm. Here's a couple of comments, nice comments from our clients, which is nice to read them at your leisure. But that first one is really around how we've helped people adapt to that remote worker and need to respond to COVID and that flexibility in work practices and in and out of the office. And of course, AVD is a wonderful way of doing that, because we can give a full Windows 10 experience. So we can mirror exactly what the user experience would be for people of the SOE in the office on the laptop or desktop at the desk, right? And taking that home and being able to consume it outside the organization, right? But give them exactly the same experience. Access to all the apps and data, etc. And then maybe one final thing before I pass over to George. We're very proud of being advanced specialists in AVD. So Microsoft now, I don't know if you're aware of this, what they do for partners like ourselves is they come in and audit our processes, our documentation, the delivery of projects and things, and they give this stamp now called advanced specialization. and they do that in a number of areas. And we were the first partner in Australia to get the Advanced Specialization Award, right? I'm one of only a small handful still today. So we're very proud of being able to do that, and that sort of speaks to our experience with those 40 plus delivery projects delivering AVD to clients. With that, I'm going to stop talking about cubesys and get into what we're really here for today, which is George to explain a bit of a background introduction to AVD. But finally, I should do ask questions. Well, if you're a bit shy, then please feel free to use the chat, and we'll respond in there and talk at the end. But do interrupt. The idea was to be nice and interactive in these sessions. So over to you, George.
Well, thanks, Paul. So, hey, everyone. My name's George Zajakowski. I'm one of the senior cloud consultants here at cubesys. I basically have about 10, 12 years of VDI experience as a background. So, Citrix, virtual apps and desktops, VMware Horizon, SCCM, Endpoint Manager, all of that stuff, and now AVD. So that's a little bit of background around me. I've done about 30, 40 projects here at my time with cubesys, and I'm really heavily invested in Azure Virtual Desktop at the moment. So I've got some good, real world experience, use cases, all unique stuff to share with you guys throughout this series. So yeah, as Paul said, ask questions. Feel free to stop me and ask a question. Let's try and make it a little bit more interactive. And in some of the coming up sessions throughout the next couple of weeks, we'll probably have some special speakers from NetApps or Nerdio or things like that, so they'll come on board to hopefully answer some of your questions as well. But yeah, let's try and make it as interactive as possible. So I'm just going to switch my camera off now because the laptop here is a bit sluggish when I'm presenting and got the camera on. But let's kick into it. Yes.
Sorry, just to interrupt.
Yep.
I'm not seeing a chat option on this meeting, just in case people are looking for it. So I'm not sure if anyone else is seeing it.
Let me just ping in the chat. Hello. Hopefully it pops up.
See that?
No, I'm not seeing it.
No, I don't think it's working for externals.
Right.
Okay. Well,
just so that people are aware, if they're trying to chat, they're going to have to speak. I'll put myself on mute again.
Thanks, Dan.
I think obviously this is our first session, and we'd not used this type of format before. We usually use the sort of just straight presentation one. So that's a lesson learned for us. We'll work that out in future ones, but do just pipe up, ask questions, please do.
Yep, cool. Awesome, right, let's kick it off. So what is Azure Virtual Desktop? So Azure Virtual Desktop was previously called Windows Virtual Desktop about a year ago or so, but then Microsoft rebranded it to Azure Virtual Desktop. So it's basically Microsoft's hosted VDI service in the cloud, and it lets you deploy and scale virtualized desktops and applications on Azure. There are many reasons why AVD is such a hot topic right now, but basically some of the ones that are top are, reduced management cost and the introduction of Windows 10 multi-session that is only available in Azure to this day. So users are familiar with the same look and feel when using AVD, right? So you can still go ahead and publish, traditional RDS deployments, Windows Server, Windows 10, Windows 7. I'll get into some of that stuff a little bit later. But basically, I guess the key thing there is Windows 10 multi-session is only available in Azure. So, other people like VMware, Citrix have started integrating into Azure so that users can take advantage of the Windows 10 multi-session. AVD supports a whole range of stuff that's natively available on a Windows 10 platform today. So things like OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, Office 365. It's all the stuff that is known to your users today is available in AVD, right? So there's no sort of retraining. There's no gotchas around when building images or things like that. It just works natively. So if anything works on Windows 10 today, it will work in Azure Virtual Desktop if you're pushing a Windows 10 multi-session image. AVD is secure, it's highly available, and it's very scalable. So you've got all the different regions that you can look at. Anything that's offered right now in Azure, you can take advantage of that. You've also got all of the cloud native stuff, like monitoring, insights, protection, firewalls, all of that stuff fully integrates with Azure Virtual Desktop. So why would you choose AVD? So basically, a lot of, yep.
Sorry, mate, just to double check what everybody else is seeing, but my screen got stuck on your.
Yeah, it's still on the Azure Virtual Desktop screen at the moment. Yeah,
yeah.
Good,
mate, just wanted to make sure. Let you keep going.
So why would you choose AVD? So users basically, these days, they need to be able to work from anywhere on any device. So, with things like the pandemic at the moment, a lot of companies have sent their users home, using VPNs, using, current Citrix deployments, things like that. There might be, they might not have enough resources on-prem to cater for that stuff, and scaling out is very costly for them. So, working in the cloud, being very scalable and highly available, AVD fits the perfect option for them. Costs, it's a lot cheaper than traditional on-prem environments. So you're pretty much only paying for storage and compute costs when, the service is running. And there's no licensing costs, like Citrix or Horizon or things like that. There's also the added benefit of not needing to spin up any additional servers, brokers, gateway, that kind of thing. So I'll go into that a little bit in depth a little bit later. It also gives you the ability to publish full desktops or individual remote applications from single host pools, multi-host pools. You can create individual group assignments for things like SAP that might have additional applications underneath it that you want to publish to a specific AD group, that kind of stuff. It also works with all apps and devices. So you've got support for Windows 10, Mac OS, iOS, Android, and there's also a HTML5 web browser support that you can use to log into the environment. So moving on. So Azure Virtual Desktop is pretty much the best virtual desktop experience delivered on Azure. You can do the only Windows 10 multi-session experience, right? So just keep that in mind. When you're moving to Windows 10 multi-session, because it's only offered in Azure, you can only get it in Azure. You would need to create any Windows 10 images that you have on-prem inside a Windows 10 multi-session Azure SKU, essentially. It's got optimizations for Microsoft 365. You can migrate any on-prem, Windows RDS style servers up into AVD and leverage that. And you can deploy and scale in minutes. So it's fully native, fully integrated inside Azure. Yeah. Azure Virtual Desktop.
Yep. George, because it's interesting that we can move RDS Windows servers up there. But obviously that still needs an RDS cal, right? Where Windows 10 doesn't, multi-session Windows 10 doesn't need an RDS cal. So out of the 40 projects that we've probably done at cubesys over the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, I don't think we've moved a single Windows Server operating system up there, right? No. It's always been recreating that Windows 10 multi-session, right? So that we can give that client experience of an actual Windows 10 operating system, but also remove the need for the RDS licenses. So it's been a way that most people have adopted that.
Exactly, and it's also people that are there creating SOEs and things like that. I'm sure many of you have come across issues where trying to like run OneDrive inside a server OS or Office 365 for that case, right? So anything that you run in Windows 10 is just native, right? It just works. You don't need to do any hacks or registry hacks or anything like that in the background to get things working. It's just all sort of out of the box, works no problem. Some additional benefits around Azure Virtual Desktop. So it's optimized for Office 365 and Pro Plus. It's also optimized for Microsoft Teams. So technically you can run Teams, audio, video, chat, all that stuff through Azure Virtual Desktop. It supports Windows Server 2012 R2 and up. So if you have any use cases where you need to run any server OSs, you can do that. You still need to bring your RDS cals across with that, as Paul mentioned. But for the Windows 10 stuff, you're probably already licensed for it. And I've got a licensing slide on that a little bit later that shows all the different SKUs, and it'll let you know if you're eligible for it. But no doubt you're probably already eligible. It's a flexible service that allows you to virtualize both your desktops and apps. If you want to run any legacy Windows 7, virtual desktop stuff, they do offer free extended security updates until January 2023, if you do have a use case for that. So if you want to bring any Windows 7 sort of VDI one-to-one mapping, so one user per virtual machine, it's not a multi-session SKU or anything like that. But if you have a use case for that, you can definitely bring that up. And also there's integration with, all the Azure sort of security suite and management of M365 up there as well. Some other additional benefits that AVD includes is things like screen capture protection. So, if you have like a host pool that's got, finance software on there or whatever, you can prevent users from taking screenshots or screen grabs if you turn that feature on. It's got some optimization around costing where you can have all of your virtual machines that are running in Azure powered off and only power on when a user connects to them. So that's basically called start on connect. So the VMs are all powered off until there is such need when someone logs in, and it'll just display a message to the user saying, please wait while we power a spare VM for you, that kind of thing. It's got the full OneDrive integration, full MS Teams optimization. One of the big things here is there are no external ports required for Azure Virtual Desktop to work. So when you provision these VMs up in Azure there is basically a AVD agent that gets installed on each of the session hosts. And from there, that service connects to the Azure AVD PaaS service, and it does a thing called reverse connect technology where it sort of phones home rather than opening ports. So it phones home to that service and says, hey, I'm available to accept connections for users inside my organization. And that's how users connect into the environment. So you don't need to open any ports on those virtual machines or punch holes through your network or anything like that. AVD also supports, multi-factor authentication and conditional access. So if you want to do that two-factor authentication, or you want to block users from logging in, overseas, internationally, that kind of thing, you can apply those policies as well. It's got your traditional auto scaling stuff in there too. So, if you say there's 10 people to a virtual machine, when the 11th person is coming on, or leave a buffer of 5 users and then power on a virtual machine, you can do that sort of auto scaling stuff. And then after hours, when users sort of go home, the environment will scale back in to save costs. So that's a native feature as well. You can also consolidate a lot of your images with tools like FSLogix. So FSLogix is a profile management, application masking, and it does things like MSI App Attach as well. So these are tools that you're already licensed for, that you can go and implement and consolidate all of your images and basically hide applications based on user Active Directory groups and things like that, so that you can technically have a really fat image with hundreds of applications on it, and then hide all of the stuff that's not applicable to some users based on AD groups. Again, there's no RDS cows for any desktop operating system, right? That's only for your Windows Server operating systems. And then, there are other more advanced features like ephemeral disks for, non-persistent VMs. So ephemeral disks, for those that don't know, are basically a disk that gets destroyed once the VM is deleted. So if you have any non-persistent VDI environments and things like that, you can take advantage of some of that. But you would need to script and do some automation around that to make things happen like that. So there is a feature that I'll speak about in some of the other sessions around Nerdio and Nerdio Manager for AVD, and that basically has a lot of scripted actions and automation and tasks and tools that allows you to take sort of more advantage of those advanced features.
I was just going to mention, the guys George has covered quite a few subjects there, particularly the FSLogix. We do have dedicated sessions for those, so we will dive into those in future weeks.
Yeah, so a lot of the other sessions are more demo orientated, so it's more hands-on, and you guys can see sort of more look and feel and how things are set up. So I'll dive more into them, but I just wanted to give everybody sort of a high-level overview of what's achievable in this environment. Cool. So traditional VDI, so this is on-prem VDI environments here, right? So we have all of these things that we need to basically maintain on-prem. We've got hardware, networking, storage. We've got, a Microsoft Server operating system that we need to patch. We need to install applications on there, or, we have like a Windows 10 SOE where it's a one-to-one desktop, so one user per VM. We need to manage and maintain all of that stuff, not to mention, auto heating, cooling, all of that stuff in our data centers, server RDS cows, that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of functional limitation with your traditional on-prem RDS environments. With AVD, you're pretty much, when you move to AVD, this is what you get. You're pretty much managing the entitlement, so who can see what, and the image management. The rest of the stuff is handled by Microsoft. So you no longer need to worry about any front door services, any brokers, any gateways, maintenance of those servers, patching, all of that stuff. That's all handled by Microsoft by the AVD PaaS service in the cloud. And I've got a diagram to talk about that a little bit later, but from our point of view, as the consumers, we are really concerned about, maintaining our images, ensuring they're patched, and assigning users to either a desktop or a group. So just diving a little bit further into that, on the right-hand side, the actual stuff that we manage is, desktop. So we determine what we are pushing, whether it be a shared or a pooled or a personal hostable, right? There's a couple of different options of AVD that you can deploy based on your use cases. You've also got the ability to deploy remote applications to users or groups, so your traditional published apps. You have full control over the image that you're deploying, so you can choose between your own image, a Azure Gallery image, BYO, that kind of stuff. But again, if you are going from Windows 10 native and you want to go take advantage of multi-session, you have to recreate your image. There's profile management stuff, so you can configure FSLogic with a storage solution like Azure Files to containerize user profiles and provide a fast and sort of stateful experience for your users. So you no longer have to use any other, tools like DEM, UEM, UPD, all of those sort of profile management tools, or even like profile redirection, right? It's all sort of containerized in, FSLogic's profile. The sizing and scaling, you can specify session host VM sizes, so you can grow, like scale up, scale in, scale out, depending on what your needs are, right? So power off the VM, change the size, power it back on, boom, you've got extra capacity there on a particular VM, or you can add more VMs if needed. The other advantage is you can also enable or provision GPU-enabled virtual machines. So, if you have some AutoCAD users or something like that that need more graphical intense applications to run, you can spin up VMs with GPUs in them as well. And then you can also schedule how you want your scaling method to work, whether it's sort of like a depth first or breadth first load balancing method. So depth first meaning, let's have one VM on to save costs and basically use it until it gets full up to whatever our limit is, on that host, whether it be 10 users, 20 users, or whether we scale it based on CPU. And then the breadth first load balancing is like, we'll have 3 VMs turned on at any given time and sort of just put, one user on the first VM, the second one will go on the second VM and the third one and so forth, and sort of gradually scale it out that way. In terms of networking policies, it connects to your own VNet, to your on-premise, using either VPN Express Route, or if you're full cloud, it connects that way. So you can still leverage your on-prem resources, your group policies, all of that stuff. Think of AVD as an extension to your existing network. And then finally, user management and identity. So you can use Azure AD and role-based access control to manage user access to these resources. You can use Active Directory groups, and you can take advantage of some of those security features such as conditional access and multi-factor authentication as well. So that's all. Anything you can do in Azure can be applied to AVD. So moving on, pooled desktop. So there are basically 2 flavors that you can do with AVD, pooled and personal VMs. So on the left-hand side, we've got a pooled desktop where we have, in this example, 1 server that's running. It might be, 8 CPUs, 16 gig of RAM, that kind of thing. So we would have 3 users logging into that single, that multi-session virtual machine, and users can run certain workloads with like light to medium, right? So your everyday office user, a replication of a typical user's laptop that they would take home. So if you want to build like an SOE in Azure, you can, and sort of just have light to medium business workloads there. And you'd obviously size that VM based on, what applications you're publishing. So every use case is unique. The other method is personal desktops, and this is typically things like, your high-end users. Maybe you have people that need to run, AutoCAD or ToothFlow or some of these, really CPU-intensive applications where, they'll kick off a job and it will take 100% of the CPU that it can and go and render a job, that kind of stuff. You would typically put those workloads on personal desktops, but there are a lot of other use cases for that. It just really depends on your needs, but those are pretty much the 2 options that you've got there. So you've got personal desktops and pooled desktops to log into.
It's quite interesting, George. I'll just jump in, and you put that on if you're talking about this a bit more later on. But what we've seen with AVD is the use of VDI has changed inside our client base. So traditionally, I've been doing VDI for 20 years, and you would normally be on the fringe and have those difficult apps into Citrix, the chatty ones back to the application or the database or something. But we're actually seeing things like full CAD and heavy GPU, and scientists using all sorts of different use cases in VDI, which is very different, right? We wouldn't normally see that on-prem. And so it's opened up this door to all sorts of different use cases because we can control that back-end infrastructure in different ways and provide different sizes of VMs for different use cases, right? So we've actually seen quite a bit of that through our projects.
Yeah, and I think as well, the other thing to consider there is, like, I mean, you can add GPU and all this high-end performance and whatnot, and the great thing about AVD is you only pay for it when it's actually running, right? I mean, these days you pay for networking, storage, and compute costs. When a VM is running, your biggest cost is the compute, the processing power, right? When a VM is shut down, you're just paying for the storage of the disk. So if you just got like I don't know, 128 gig premium SSD that's powered off, it's probably going to cost you about $19 a month, right? So when it's off, it's not really charging you, but when it's powered on, you use it to render your job, whatever the case is, and then once that's done, power off the VM and you're good to go. So you're saving costs just by spinning up.
We've got some stats on the, and we'll talk a bit more about that in one of the future sessions around how we sort of budget for AVD and help the business understand where to spend. But I think from over about 80% is the compute costs. So if we can turn that off when it's not in use, that means that particularly those high-end sort of scientists or CAD users, right, they only use them for X number of hours a day, then we can power them off, and it can be quite economical, right? Better way of doing that. So it's good.
Yep.
Thanks,
well, not to jump the gun into cost models and stuff like that. So the difference between a personal and a shared desktop, from a cost perspective, because obviously there's session costs per user per month, and then there are host costs per month. So if you had dedicated desktops allocated to a team of resources for whatever reason based on their requirements, what's the cost difference in terms of putting all of them onto a shared versus a dedicated or personal desktop? Just very quickly, I don't want to.
So the high level with that, Dom, is the shared costs are like usually about 20% of the environment is shared costs, and they're things like the profile storage and things like that, and the network, and they don't really move too much. What we see where we tackle that cost base and where you would get difference between pooled, multi-session, and personal is the compute. And we do things, some smart things with the automation that like Nerdio helps us. For example, George mentioned those premium SSDs. So when we're not using the VM, we'll actually change the operating system to a cheaper disk SKU. So like to just that standard disk, right? And then lower the cost while it's not in use. And then when we power on a VM, so it does get used by the person or by the pool of people, then we'll switch that to an SSD, right? And then so we get the better performance, and you're paying for the slightly the better performance while you use it. So it all depends on, and then we do have a future session where we talk about the economics of AVD. It's really, really important that we understand how it's being used by the user base, right? And it's quite difficult to understand that sometimes, but we can make some good estimates, right? So we really need to know the hours of operation, because what we're doing now is we're turning off compute, which is at 80% of the environment when it's not being used, and turning it on to react to when people do use it, right? So understanding those patterns inside your business is really important to understanding the economics of AVD.
Yeah, and that's the challenge I think we're facing. So how does that differ then from just an application in the traditional sense of like a published app versus a shared desktop?
Well, a desktop is always going to utilize like more resources, right? Because you got to send the whole desktop through, it loads more services in the background, that kind of stuff. So depending on the application as well. So if you're pushing some sort of CAD application, then you might want to publish that as a remote app on a personal VM just to get 100% of the actual hardware in the background to go and render that job. It really depends on how hard you're crunching that machine.
So that's more from a UX perspective, I suppose. If it's just from an application perspective, we have a specialist app that's required by various users across the fleet. And we want them to be able to access it remotely, so through AVD. does publishing that application and managing the access to that application through an AD group impose a much higher cost, a similar cost, or?
Oh, it'd be lower cost on, Ben. That's predominantly because, as Joe was saying, when we publish a desktop, you consume more of the back end resources to publish that.
Yep.
So with a desktop, obviously there's other things happening that the user can interact with. When you publish the application, we're actually just running that application for that user. Right?
So it's not consuming a session on a host.
Yeah, the amount of compute resources. So when you, I suppose if you open up Task Manager on your desktop, right, and see what's running, there's all sorts of things running in the background to manage the desktop, right, and the desktop experience, right. When we do that for just one application for a user in a multi-session environment, then we're just really giving them that task for that application, right. There's a couple of things in the back, but predominantly that's the main difference. So you get more bang for your buck when you publish an app.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Yeah. So here are some use cases, sort of out there in the real world around, why people are using AVD versus on-prem kind of stuff, right? So one of the big ones is like mergers and acquisition. So people that are looking to, merge a couple of companies together, they might look at AVD to basically tie in two different tenants, short-term employees. So you might have contractors that need to come in and just do something, and then, give them access for a week, whatever they need, and then, blow away their machine, that kind of stuff. Contractors, call center workers. We've got a couple of customers, that are using AVD as like a call center environment. And then the one on the right, GPU rendering, software dev test, that kind of stuff. So testing applications, any legacy apps, hosting that kind of stuff. There's real, a lot of different use cases that you can use for this. It just really depends on sort of what you've got on-prem, where the struggle is, and AVD, I'm sure, will have an answer for that. Just as a little laugh, when AVD came out and they announced that they had GPUs available, I went and installed Microsoft Flight Simulator in an AVD environment running on a full-blown desktop. And you can see there in the screenshot on the right, it was a M60 Tesla graphics card. So it's obviously not a gaming style graphics card, but it was good enough to run Microsoft Flight Simulator for me. So I did just test the boundaries of how good AVD is and graphics rendering and things like that is. So that was pretty cool.
And if anybody hasn't seen the Australian version of Flight Simulator, you should go and look at, go and Google that and find the YouTube clip of it. It's phenomenal now what they've done inside of Flight Sim. Right? So go and have a look. You can probably see your neighborhood. Right?
Yep. Really, really in-depth detail, and it does live weather and all that stuff. It's pretty awesome. Okay, so end-to-end security. So basically over here, I mean, as I mentioned before, it integrates with everything that's in Azure, right? So anything you can do now, you can still apply to AVD. You've got multi-factor authentication, conditional access. You can block locations except for trusted IPs, for example, your Office. It can integrate with Intune, SCCM. You can apply disk encryption to your VMs. It's got generation 2 VMs with, like virtual TPM chips, that kind of stuff. So all of the stuff that's accessible now, like Azure Sentinel, for example, Security Center or Azure Defender, I think it's been recently renamed, Key Vault, all of that stuff, you can apply all of that to your environment and be secure and know that you're protected. Just moving on to the user flow real quick. So on the left-hand side, we've got the clients. In the middle, we've got the Azure Virtual Desktop PaaS service. So this is the offering that Microsoft handles for us. And then over on the right-hand side, we've got our Azure tenant, our Azure environment. So what happens in a typical deployment is you would create a host pool, you deploy VMs in there, and those VMs will be running the AVD agent. That AVD agent connects to the AVD managed service with that reverse connect technology. So it's always phoning home. Sorry, there it is there. So connection 0. From that point on, connection 1 is the user will launch the AVD client, which connects to Azure AD. The user signs in and an Azure AD token gets returned. The AVD client then presents the token to the web access broker. It brokers the database to determine which resources are authorized for that user or assigned to that user. The user selects either a desktop or a remote app, and then the AVD client connects to the gateway, and then it is brokered through the gateway that Microsoft hosts for us. So there's we are always tunneling through the Azure has service for AVD to get to our desktops, right? So there's no ports open or anything like that. There is a new option that's just been released called, I think it's RDP Short Path. So RDP Short Path basically allows us to utilize our express route. If we have a express route connectivity and our customers, our users are in the office, for example, we can punch a hole through the network and go via the express route if it's a bigger pipe than, say, our internet link, for example. But it just really depends on how you want to do it. So when you use RDP Short Path, it uses UDP instead of TCP, so it's a lot quicker, a lot smoother, less latency, that kind of stuff. So if that's something that's an issue at the moment, like connectivity wise, latency, you can look at RDP Short Path as well. Just a real quick AVD architectural overview. So this is what a typical deployment would look like for AVD. So you'd have your on-prem environment over on the left-hand side. You'd have your express route connectivity or your VPN into Azure, and you'd have a sort of like a hub virtual network. At the top here, we've got the Windows Virtual Desktop control plane. So the gateway, the web access server, the broker, all that stuff that Microsoft handles for us. We will deploy a host pool that contains a bunch of VMs. Now, those VMs will phone home to that Windows Virtual Desktop control plane to say, yep, hey, I'm active, I'm alive, I'm ready to accept connections. We can also deploy a second host pool for a different use case. One can be single session users, the other one can be multi-session users. It can be broken down based on, like a privileged access workstation, for example, or contractor users and normal, internal employees, that kind of thing, with different firewall rules and different access policies to go to other services. So it really depends on how you want to set it up. And then over to the right-hand side, we would have something like Azure Files or Azure NetApp files to basically store the user profiles, which when using FSLogix, it basically containerizes them as a virtual hard disk, and it roams and connects to the user's VM when they go to log in. So all user data is not stored on the virtual machines; they're stored in Azure Files. When a user logs in, depending on which host pool they get to, that VHD with the user profile will get attached to the VM, and it's pretty much instantaneous, right? It doesn't copy it across; it just attaches directly over the network. So you need really quick and high IOPS storage to do that. Just real quick, so some prereqs to deploy AVD. You obviously need an AVD Azure subscription, Active Directory. You can use Active Directory on-prem. You can use Azure Active Directory domain services, and you can also use Azure AD to do your, your identity type and domain joins and things like that. You also need to have your images, your virtual network, your storage, all of that stuff in a region of your choice. You can also do DR environments as well if you want, like an active or an active passive deployment across multi-regions that's supported. And then you need your credentials, so you need a subscription contributor, domain join credentials if you do an on-prem AD join, Azure AD credentials, that kind of stuff to get the environment working. Just want to cover real quick at a high level what FSLogix does. So I already mentioned before, it's profile containerization. You've got your different storage options to store those containers. You've got the ability to mask or hide applications based on user or group permissions and rule sets. The one that I didn't cover was Java control, and I've probably come across one or two customers over the 30, 40 deployments that we've done that actually use this. So this is just, if you have multiple versions of Java installed on your AVD clients and you need a specific website to use a particular version of Java, this can solve that issue for you. Down the bottom there, we can see when a user logs in at step 1, they will get passed through to the host pool and connect to the host pool. As soon as that happens, the user profile share at step number 3 gets not copied, but mounted from the Azure file share to that VM. At the same time, if you're using technologies like MSI App Attach, that can also attach applications to the user session, and I'll get into a bit more detail. There's a separate session around that in the coming weeks, but that can get attached as well. And then finally, they'll log into the workspace and see the sort of the desktop or the application presented to them. And this happens in a matter of seconds. It's really, really quick.
I just wanted to add, George, when just on that FSLogix piece, guys, this is one of the the key technologies that makes AVD different to what we're used to in VDI, particularly VDI on-prem, right? So the next session we have is focused on FSLogix and how that works and the impact it has on our user experience and to us as IT professionals is really profound. And I think it was one of the things I was most excited about when I first saw AVD come to market. So I think it's awesome the way that profile management works and how we can sort of utilize that to get a better experience for the users. And then when we add the app attach, which I know you've got another session on that, that's pretty awesome the way that the applications attach to the operating system but leave no footprint there, and means that for IT operations that we can patch and manage the operating system separate to the apps and separate to the user profile, which is always been an area of high challenge when it comes to VDI environments. So they're pretty profound changes that, and so we're looking forward to telling you a bit more detail and getting under the hood and showing you some demos and how that works in the coming sessions.
So the big question, are you eligible? On the left-hand side, Windows 10, Windows 7 support. If you have any of those licenses there, you're pretty much eligible for Windows Virtual Desktop Azure Virtual Desktop today. If you want to look at migrate Windows Server operating systems into AVD, you still need to bring across your RDS cows with your software assurance. But you have any of those licenses there on the left, you're eligible right now. Windows 10 multi-session, you can go and deploy it. You're covered. That also covers the cost for FSLogix as well. That's included as part of the price. The key thing as well down the bottom there is you only pay for the virtual machine storage and networking consumed when the users are using the service. When your users are not using it and you've got the scaling to scale host down and whatnot, you're only paying for storage costs. Depending on how big your disk sizes are, that's what you'll be charged. But primarily the big cost there, as Paul mentioned, is your compute, right? We're seeing all the money is more geared towards the compute costs. If you're not running the VMs after hours, you're not getting charged for them.
Just you're about to talk, I was going to say you're about to talk Citrix and VMware. The one we do have clients that use that control plane, as you're about to explain.
Yep.
Obviously, the licensing is on top of what we've just discussed, right? Yep. So when you use native AVD and use the Microsoft control plane, then there is no additional charge. But if you use Citrix and VMware, obviously you do for those products.
Yeah, exactly right. You pretty much covered that slide, Paul. Thanks for that. So yes.
Sorry, mate.
You can layer Citrix and VMware on top of AVD to take advantage of using those control planes, so you don't have to retrain your staff in how to use Azure native resources and things like that. If you want, you can do that, but yes, it is an additional cost.
It's probably important to mention that they do take over the control plane, so they don't use the Microsoft PaaS services. You use the Citrix and you use the VMware control planes when you do choose to use them. That obviously has benefits, but it means that you do need to make sure that you're using that cloud service, and that comes with a few things that you've got to be aware of, like some additional costs to Azure to host those control plane components and things. They're not huge, and there is some benefits to using those particularly if you've already got them in your environment. It can be useful.
Yeah. So just an example, VMware Horizon. When you go to the VMware Horizon on Microsoft Azure, it integrates with obviously Azure, and you can deploy Windows 10 multi-session VMs. But as part of that, it actually deploys, UAG, so Unified Access Gateway, smart nodes, load balancers, public IPs, that kind of stuff that are actually hosted inside your own tenant there. So although it is a cloud service, it's all hosted on Azure, and you have full control over that too. So that's what Paul's referring to. The other one is Nerdio Manager for Enterprise. So this is one, I've got a separate session just on Nerdio, because Nerdio is a beast and it offers everything that AVD has got to offer natively. It also does a lot of the stuff that Citrix and VMware have to offer, and then some more. So this is our #1 go-to solution for any AVD deployments. It is probably the most cost-effective and biggest bang for buck. It does a lot of things like automation, smart, auto-healing, hosts that are broken, self-service portal to allow your users to power on, power off their own VMs themselves, so they don't have to log tickets and get someone else to go and power on a VM if it's stuck for whatever reason. It does MSI app packaging, delivery. It manages your images. This is probably one of the biggest features that Nerdio's got. So when you do traditional image management in Azure, you need to spin up a VM, you install your applications, you shut it down, you snapshot it, then you bring it back up again, you sysprep it, then you shut it down again, and you capture that image into the shared image gallery. There's so much back and forth to do it. With this, you literally just go, power on my VM, install my applications, hit a button and say, capture and deploy this to a session host. Like it takes all of the little nitty gritty stuff out of all of the sort of, painstaking tasks that we all want to avoid, and it saves a lot of time when it comes to this kind of stuff.
It's been really, really impactful for a lot of our clients, Nerdio, and I think what I really like about it is it doesn't take over the control plane, right? So it leaves the Microsoft control plane and the Microsoft environment native. So you can actually install Nerdio and then uninstall it, and it still leaves AVD in place. Obviously, you lose that finer detail of automation that George is talking about, but really they just add value to where they came from. And back when the pandemic was happening and we were rushing around trying to help a lot of clients get remote workers up and running, we were actually internally writing a lot of that automation and the things that George was talking about. So we were using our DevOps practice to sort of build automation for clients. And then we came across Nerdio, and I remember walking out of the meeting and saying, stop, let's not bother doing any more development ourselves. This tool does everything we need and more. So we've been big fans of Nerdio ever since, and it's really helps. Yep. And it saves a lot of money as well, because it does some really quite granular automation around and looks at the CPU usage, for example, so we can see what's happening inside a VM and then control the automation to add or remove VMs and control costs. That's more aligned to the usage patterns. Right? So it's been great, and like Josh said, we've got a separate session on that, so we'll dive into lots of detail there.
Yep, definitely come to that one. That one's going to be really interesting. Cool. So the next slide is just what does the user see from an end user experience, right? So I'm just going to run a little quick little video that's just going to demo some of the features of what AVD Windows 10 multi-session has to offer, and then I'll show you what the interface looks like to the end user, and we can go into some questions. So let me kick that off. Cool. So yeah, pretty much your traditional Windows 10 look and feel that everybody's used to. Supports Windows.
I love that video, Josh, because it's so hard to make AVD or VDI sort of interesting from a demo point of view. What you get, but what you should probably all take away, guys, from that is that we can replicate a Windows 10 environment exactly like your laptop or desktop inside the office. We can make that same look and feel, the same applications, OneDrive integration, Teams, all that stuff. It all comes as part of that desktop. So I suppose that's what that takeaway from that video is. It's exactly like you would expect to have on your SOE.
absolutely.
Which we've done, George. You've done that for lots of clients, particularly in responding to the pandemic. One of the first things we often do before we get into some of the more exciting use cases is to replicate the SOE, right, and just put that up into the cloud so we can connect to it remotely.
Yep. And there's different ways you can do it. Obviously, you can go through and manually install the apps. You can run a SCCM task sequence on there. If you want, if you've got any other automation tools, you can definitely run them and spin up a gold image and be up and running, really, really quickly. So it's real awesome to have all of that.
I mean, something that I'd like to see our clients sort of changing or improving, but we can start off by using the same GPOs as we do on-prem. So we get exactly the same look and feel for the users, and we get the same security posture, right? And so we can make sure that we're, filtering the internet appropriately, that we're using the same AV products and all the good security that you've built for your SOE, we can replicate up there in AVD.
Yep. For anyone wondering, this is what the AVD client looks like. So so it obviously integrates with the start menu when you connect. But if you do want to, launch the sort of traditional fat client, this is what it looks like. I've got two tenants there. So one is traditional AVD. The oh my god WVD Live Classic one is the old Windows Virtual Desktop version, which is non-ARM based, so it's different sort of deployment methodology. And then the last one down there, Cloud PC Enterprise, is Windows 365. So it also looks at your Windows 365 devices if you have any there. Any questions from anybody?
Maybe we can have a show of hands. Is anybody interested in more detail on the Windows 365 and how that works or can sit alongside AVD as a solution in your environment? We can definitely tweak one of our sessions to look at that in more detail. So let us know if that's something you're interested in.
Well, I just had a question. Windows 11, so Windows 365 running Windows 11 versus AVD. Now, throughout the whole presentation, we've always said Windows 10. Does AVD support Windows 11? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if our SOE changed for whatever reason and we embraced Windows 11, they just changed the image and there shouldn't be any issue.
Correct.
Yep. Yeah, it's fully supported. Yeah, Windows 11 multi-session is supported as well. Yes.
So why would you go Windows 365 as compared to AVD?
Windows 365 is a different economical model and is different in the back end in that Microsoft hosts even more of the environment. So you really manage the operating system and don't worry about anything else. And it's a one-to-one service, so it's not multi-session. Right?
Yeah.
And you pay for it at a fixed price. So in AVD, we've got the control over what it costs by, what we're consuming in Azure, and it's very much up to us as IT professionals what happens there. But in Windows 365, it is more like Office 365. It's a SKU, a license that you buy. You have different sizes of VMs that are defined by Microsoft, and then you manage it like you would your laptop, right? So that's why we refer to it as a cloud PC. It is exactly like your laptop, but in the cloud, right? And AVD, obviously, we've got a bit more control as IT professionals. It's more that traditional VDI type solution. But we can dive into some more on how that works and how you manage W365 if that's of interest to people. We can even add a session at the end, or we can adapt one of the ones we've got and deep dive into W365. Please let us know.
You could add to session 6 just at a very high level in terms of the comparison. Yeah, we could add some detail in there. Yeah. So we will be going in. So we have a full economic assessment we do where we ask a bunch of questions and we'll walk through how we do that, right? And then we build out your cost base so we can predict, help people build that business case, right? So that you can justify AVD over your current cost base and what you do on prem. So we'll go into that and we've got some info on W365 there. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Probably a little bit late for us, but it's interesting to hear. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's good. It's certainly an area of growth and interest, the W365 space. Yeah. Cool. Any questions pop to mind? Do take away this session was very much the introduction stuff. The next one, when we get into FS Logic's profiles and apps, we will be much more demoing console open, showing you some of the how to put some settings in place. So
come along with technical questions and how things work. So don't be scared to ask us anything. Like, so we've got a plethora of experience in different use cases, so I'm sure we will come across it at some point.
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, I much prefer the technical sessions over these sessions here, because I like getting into the nitty-gritty and getting involved with some of your technical questions, and it is hands-on. It's a demo, it's live, it's not recorded, so there will be problems, there will be issues, but yes, definitely come along and learn a thing or two.
Yep. So anybody got any questions on the overview of AVD? Anything spring to mind? I mean, remember when I first came across AVD, what I was most taken by was the sort of almost utopia of being able to manage the operating system separate to the user profile. So when you'll see in our next session, the way that the FS Logic containerizes the profile and attaches it to the operating system is very different to what we've used in the past, right? And it means that we can manage as IT professionals that image in a very different way, which is much more effective, right? And then we layer on like the app attach when you move things to MSIX, and then you can do exactly the same thing with applications. So as the user logs on, it will attach to the operating system. It does not install it, it attaches, very different, and leaves the operating system nice and clean. And so when we're doing upgrades and things to the application or the operating system, we can keep them separate, and makes our operational flow very different. I suppose the other big thing is that it is actually Windows 10, right? It's not a server operating system, so we can manage it just like we do on-prem. So that's often an interesting conversation as we introduce AVD into clients' environments. Do I continue using SCCM to patch and manage that operating system? Do I use that DevOps and automation to do that? Because we can do some really cool things now with AVD, like grab the image out of the image gallery each month from Microsoft, pre-installed with Office 365 and pre-patched, and then layer our apps on top, and then run that into a validation host pool, make sure it's working okay, and then run it out into production. And that whole process I've just described there is really one click of a button for IT guys, right? So they basically have to approve that production rollout from the validation pool. The rest of it we can all automate, and it can happen while we're in bed asleep, and it's ready for us to sort of test the next day. So do you do that, or do you use Intune and use all your policies and things you've got in Intune and stuff as well? So there's lots of options when it comes to that. So it really depends on how you organize yourselves as a business and an IT department. So we've seen some pretty cool stuff there. Cool. Any other questions or comments? Spark any sort of thoughts from you guys? Okay.
Well, all right, let's wrap it up then.
You've done a really good job, George, of
must have answered everybody's questions.
Like I said, again, we'll just remind you that those next sessions are very technical, right? We're going to be hands-on, so bring your problems and concerns and quizzes on there. We will for NetApp and for Nerdio, we'll drag along some people from those providers and talk about why we use them in AVD and where the benefits are and how to get the best out of them. Yep, and then we'll get on to some of the costs and economic assessments. Oh, and the cost analysis and chargebacks is a really interesting one. So a lot of our enterprise clients have been really interested in how we can show the costs of AVD back to each individual cost center or business unit. So we've got the situation in a large enterprise where you've got multiple departments using that one image and that shared infrastructure of AVD, and the multi-session in particular. Like, how do you work out how much to charge each person, right? And what we've got there is we've actually built something that allows us to look at all the Azure cost data through the API that they provide, and combine that with session data. So when the user logs on and when they log off, we can see how much time they've spent on AVD, and then we can tell you exactly how much that has cost. So if that's chargeback or sometimes with some of our clients is not so much charging back those individual business units, but being able to show them what they've spent, right? And we can be really granular. So if you've spent 1 hour on a generic VM for your SOE, it costs this much, but then you've got a big end GPU box that did some CAD engineering or scientific calculations or something, we can tell you how much that costs as well, like if that was sort of a different set of hours used by that user. All right, so we can get in some pretty impressive detail for that. which is good and helps us control that conversation with the business and how much things cost, which is great. So we'll look forward to telling you all about that later. Cool. Well, I think that's a wrap then. We'll let you get back. Thank you for spending the time with us. And look, hopefully this format works. Again, I know Katie from our team will be sending out some questionnaires and asking, and getting feedback from you. Please give us feedback. We can adapt and change these, but the intention is to run these every 2 weeks for this sort of 45 minutes an hour, and we'll get in some techie detail and show you some of the problems that we've faced with customers, tell you stories about how we got around them and the work that we've done over the last sort of couple of years in AVD. So do bring along your questions, right? And we'll look forward to seeing you in the future sessions.
Awesome.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for attending, everyone.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, George.
Thanks, guys.
Stay
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.